This is Democracy Watch. Mark, we've got a major update from the U.S. Supreme Court, something that you and I have spoken about at length, and it seems that what we have feared as far as the Supreme Court is concerned seems to be coming true. Can you explain what this update at the court is?
Yeah, Brian, we finally have the brief from the Department of Justice in the very important Voting Rights Act case out of Louisiana. And this brief is a blockbuster, and not in a good way. The Department of Justice, after 70 years of being the keeper of the Voting Rights Act, the agency under Democrats and Republicans that have sought to protect and ensure that minority voters do not have their voting rights diluted, well, the Trump Department of Justice has filed a brief saying that Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, the test that has been used to protect Black voters, minority voters, it should be rewritten and essentially gutted so that states would have much freer reign to draw maps that discriminated against Black voters, had the effect of discriminating against Black voters. This is a dark day for democracy, but I can promise everyone we are going to fight this. We are not going to bow down to Donald Trump and his Department of Justice, and we are going to insist that the U.S. Supreme Court stand by decades upon decades of its own precedent and reject this effort to undermine minority voting rights.
Mark, just so that folks who are watching right now can appreciate the gravity of this case in particular, can you explain a little bit of what would happen in the event that Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act is gutted at the hands of the Supreme Court?
Yeah, and this case is a good illustration, right? Louisiana, after the 2020 census, drew a map that failed to protect the rights of its Black citizens. It drew a map with one rather than two Black opportunity districts, which is just a fancy way of saying they created maps that disadvantaged Black voters in violation of federal law, in violation of a federal law first passed by Congress in 1965. It has been updated on a bipartisan basis ever since. Until recently, it was viewed by Republicans and Democrats alike as the crown jewel of American democracy. Well, my law firm and others brought a lawsuit that struck down that first map and required a new map that complied with the Voting Rights Act. The state of Louisiana passed that new map, and that is why, as we record this today, after the 2024 election, there are now two rather than one Black candidates of choice in the congressional delegation in Louisiana. Well, what happened next is to be predicted. A group of white, non-Black plaintiffs brought a challenge saying that this new map violates their rights. And this is the kind of case that should have just been dismissed out of hand. And in fairness to the trial court, it was dismissed, like it was rejected. But the U.S. Supreme Court has taken this case up, and there will be argument in it, actually re-argument in it this October. It was heard last term. And rather than the Supreme Court just rejecting this with the back of the hand, they considered it and set it for this re-argument in October. And so we have been waiting to see what position the parties take in this case relative to the positions they took when it was heard last term. Now, last term, the state of Louisiana defended this map and the Department of Justice defended this map, along with the parties that were involved in litigation. Well, now we see the state of Louisiana and its officials backing away from this map. They're now retreated and said that this map should be struck down, even though they enacted it. And now in this blockbuster filing, the DOJ itself has reversed its position. Not just its position in this case, though, Brian, its position in literally dozens upon dozens of cases where both Democratic and Republican attorneys general and their solicitor generals have defended the Voting Rights Act under the so-called Jingles test, which has been in place now for decades. And what they want to replace it with, Brian, is something that would be the Voting Rights Act in name only. You know, it would basically say that unless the map that is being offered by plaintiffs to replace an illegal map, unless it essentially accomplishes the same political objectives as the state on a partisan basis and can therefore sort of deconstruct race from party, and the initial map intentionally discriminated based on race, the state's map stands. Well, that's an impossible test. I mean, you know, where you have Black voters voting overwhelmingly for Democratic candidates, you're never going to be able to disentangle race from party. So what they're basically saying is, if the state of Louisiana discriminates against Black voters, too bad, unless those Black voters can show that they can pass a a map that will still favor Republicans while vindicating the right of black voters. It's nonsensical. It is cynical, but we're going to fight it, and we're going to prevent this from going into effect.
Just a quick side note for everybody who's watching right here. The reality is that Mark and his team are the ones litigating this stuff in the courts. This isn't just us talking about it from a media perspective. This is Mark who's actually fighting this fight on the front line. So for anybody who wants to support his work, where it matters most, the best way to do that, small step we can all take, is to sign up for Democracy Docket. It's the news outlet he founded to focus on everything voting in elections. I'm going to put the link right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. Again, a small step we can all take to support this invaluable work. Mark, you had mentioned, we had spoken about the fact that now the DOJ is reversing course. It filed an amicus brief that went to the Supreme Court, so they're throwing their full weight behind this effort, something that we all feared and expected would happen. How much of an impact is the fact that the DOJ is now siding with this thing? How much impact does that actually have? How much impact does an amicus brief have? Or is this just something that, regardless of whether the DOJ intervened or not to give its opinion, the Supreme Court is going to take and run with regardless?
Yeah, so I realize the nomenclature here can get a little complicated. We should not consider a brief filed by the Department of Justice, even though it is an amicus brief. We should not discount it the way in which we oftentimes say, well, lots of people file amicus briefs.
Right.
You know, there could be 100 amicus briefs, and they're not as important as the briefs of the parties. That isn't true when it's on behalf of the United States, right? When the federal government, when the Solicitor General submits a brief saying the position of the Department of Justice, which is the agency charged with protecting voting rights, says this is our position on the law, it carries enormous weight. It carries as much weight, frankly, as the briefs of any of the parties. And what do I mean by that? I mean that the justices will read what the Department of Justice says on the same level of importance as them reading the briefs of the parties themselves. In fact, in this case, the Solicitor General is seeking time to argue. And again, that's something that other amicus don't get to do, right? So we should think about the Department of Justice, even though they are not technically a party, they are for all practical purposes a party. Now, you ask how important it is. Well, you know, there's an old saying that the Solicitor General is sometimes referred to as the 10th Justice. Right? The justices oftentimes want to hear from the Solicitor General because they are supposed to be the nonpartisan office that keeps the flame of the Constitution, above partisanship within the federal government, right? They are the people who are supposed to, through Democratic administrations and Republican administrations, they are supposed to be the true north for what federal law says and what the Constitution says. And so justices oftentimes look to the Solicitor General and ask their opinion on thorny questions. Now, in this instance, let's be honest, this Solicitor General is just doing the bidding of the White House, right? I mean, nothing changed in the interpretation of the Voting Rights Act over the course of the last 9 months. The only thing that changed is Donald Trump. And so I hope that the justices will view this for what it is, which is the position of a very partisan Department of Justice, a very partisan Solicitor General. But I worry that, that a Supreme Court that has become increasingly hostile to civil rights, become increasingly hostile to voting rights, will look at this brief from the Solicitor General and be like, great, the Solicitor General, the smart people over there who consider these issues on a weighty basis. Right. This is what they say. But look, we can't give up this fight. We have to insist that the courts protect the voting rights of minority voters in the same way that they have through Democratic and Republican administrations, through periods of more and less racial polarization in voting. And we have to count on them and insist that they do that. But I'd be lying if I didn't say, Brian, that this is another blow to the rule of law and democracy from the Trump administration.
We spend so much time thinking about these mid-cycle map redraws, and you and I have spoken at length about California redrawing its maps to try and counteract what's happening in Texas, about the fact that Missouri has now jumped into the fray, Indiana, Ohio, Florida, all of whom are engaged in this kind of race to the bottom to give Donald Trump what he wants, which is basically a scientifically engineered method to be able to retain control of the House. And there's so much of a battle going on that front, but how would the gutting of Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act complicate things even further than we're already seeing them complicated now, thanks to the mid-cycle map redraws?
Oh, if they struck down Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, it would make what Texas did look like child's play. I mean, in fact, Texas would presumably go back and redraw again and just completely ignore racial voting rights entirely.
Right. What few constraints even made that map somewhat palatable would be gone.
Absolutely. I mean, let's just start with Missouri. I mean, Missouri struck down, Missouri obliterated the district in Kansas City, but it kept the one in St. Louis. I mean, and presumably it did that because it was afraid it would run afoul of the Voting Rights Act, given the large black population in St. Louis. I mean, that would no longer be a constraint. We look at states in the Deep South, Brian, which we rarely talk about in the context of mid-cycle redistricting, right? We haven't seen Alabama, Louisiana, Mississippi, South Carolina, Tennessee. We haven't seen them talk about doing mid-cycle redistricting because the districts that they have left that are held by Democrats are majority, minority, or majority or are minority influence districts, right? If all of a sudden the Voting Rights Act didn't exist, or this preposterous test that Louisiana proposes was the law, you would see mid-cycle redistricting in all of those states, presumably, right? They're all controlled by Republicans. The difference is they are constrained by the Voting Rights Act. So, the two districts that have black representation in Alabama, Alabama might be able to sort of litigate over one of those two districts, which it's doing. Louisiana was litigating over one of the two districts, which it could do. Even Ron DeSantis in Florida was gerrymandering, but had to respect some of the districts that were majority minority districts. If Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act goes away, all of those districts become subject to frankly, just in a partisan gerrymander period. And there's nothing that protects them other than whatever other kinds of claims we will work on, whatever state laws may exist, whatever we might be able to convince the courts to understand as intentional discrimination. But proving intentional discrimination is a lot harder than proving, that the map in fact has the effect of discriminating against black voters.
Well, look, all of that underscores the need for people like you to be not just fighting these fights on the ground where it matters most, which is in the courts, but also reporting on this stuff. And we've seen a massive absence of reporting as far as legacy media is concerned. So again, if you are not yet subscribed to Democracy Docket and you want to support the invaluable work of Mark and his team, please make sure to sign up. I'm going to put the link right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. Please support fearless independent journalism. So that link is right here on the screen. If you're not yet subscribed to this channel, please subscribe to that as well. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I just want to add, when we're recording this, two things are true. Number one, Democracy Docket broke the news as a matter of news that this took place, that this brief got filed. And you and I, if not for this series, if not for the Democracy Watch series, I don't think it would be being covered on YouTube. I mean, you deserve a lot of credit, and this channel deserves a lot of credit, because this is the kind of stuff that is, 6 weeks from now, 8 weeks ago, 2 months from now, you'll have the legacy media and other people on YouTube, talking about this and saying what happened. But here it is, because you built this channel and because you prioritize democracy issues and because you approached me, a few years ago now, to do this series. The viewers, people who subscribe to this channel, are kept abreast of these things when they happen, not 2 months from now, not even 2 weeks from now when they hit the pop culture, but now. And so I really do encourage everyone not only to subscribe to this channel, but also to hit the bell, because that will make sure you get an alert when there is new content. And believe me, there is going to be a lot of important breaking new content that you are going to want to stay abreast of.
Well, I appreciate that. And again, both of the links to Democracy Docket and this channel are right here on the screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
I'm Mark Elias.
This is Democracy Watch.